I'm going to show you how you've probably been looking into and been in relationships for maybe a long time. I'm going to do this by making spiritual and psychological reference to the Netflix series called You. And the question that comes in is, are you a Joe Goldberg? Going into the toxic dynamics of twisted love and illusionary devotion. Let's get into it. Mr. Goldberg is a character in the Netflix series You. He attracts, seeks, and kills women who he sees as a gateway to his unworthiness wound. He also kills anyone else who gets in the way of that, but sees it as an act of devotion. Or at least he thinks it's an act of devotion. And when he does kill, he loves it. It's a thrill. It's exhilarating, which indicates that, from an unprofessional opinion, Joe shows antisocial behaviors, narcissistic tendencies, attachment issues, and childhood trauma. Joe was raised in a very traumatic, abusive household with an abusive father and a very neglectful mother. One day, the abuse got extremely severe, and little Joe killed his father in order to protect his mother. This was the beginning of the narration of having to kill to protect, to love, and to devote. It seemed like his mother had a lot of shame and decided to leave him in a group home, which was not ideal for his upbringing and brought even more trauma in his life. This recreates the abandonment wound, which leads Joe to thinking that he has to earn love. This only, however, leads to a path of ultimate maniacal control. This leads him to idealizing his mom, but resenting her for abandoning him, which created a core wound of unworthiness and feeling unlovable. Joe later discovers that he has a brother and that his mom started a whole new life with a new family, which ultimately leaves Joe feeling like absolute shit. Along with abuse in the group home, he met a character called Mr. Mooney, who owned a bookstore, which led to Joe's love for books, or stories that created alternate universes and realities and ideas. Mr. Mooney, however, turns out to be abusive as well and puts Joe in a cage when he is not acting accordingly. This led Joe to believe that love is about control, psychological manipulation, and confinement. Now let's segue into how Joe as an adult idealizes these women. So as you can see in this series, Joe is a very complex character. Yes, he shows a lack of remorse. Yes, he has very a grandiose attitude when it comes to doing things that he thinks is right, and he has very obsessive compulsive behaviors. But you could see that he has a deep, fragmented internal world where he is dealt with shame and guilt when it comes to facing a strong mirror. And these women that he has dated indeed are the mirrors into the fragments of his soul, which also mirror back their wounds as well. But let's look at this dialogue between him and his son, Henry. So unfortunately, I can't use the audio in this scene, but basically Joe is confronted with the dialogue between him and his son, that his son knows who he truly is, a massive serial killer, a manipulator, and quote unquote a monster all along. And basically, Joe at the end of the scene says his mother knew that she'd know about you all along. And that's not detail for detail, but that kind of sums up that Henry knows who he truly is. And you could tell that Joe is very distraught, very disappointed, and basically he's seeing a reflection of himself. There was something about this scene that really spoke to me, and I think it has to do with the impact that Joe feels while talking to his son, because his son, in a way, is him. It's like talking to your former younger self, and his son Henry is literally telling him who he is at his core. And Joe feels very shameful and very guilty for that, right? And I think Joe genuinely loves his son, but he also sees his son as an extension of himself. His love is covered by his own limitations, which could be his grandiosity, his self-denial, and his self-projection, and his trauma. And I think in Joe's mind, he thinks that, well, he is trying to keep Henry physically safe and out of harm's way, but he doesn't realize that his actions, like killing people, leading people on, gaslighting people, manipulating people, can leave a psychological and spiritual imprint on Henry. He lied to Henry about how his mom was killed. And if you guys don't know, Henry's mom is called Love Quinn, which was Joe's former wife in a previous season that he killed in their own household. So let's look at a clip how he does a disservice to his son. So Joe and Kate went to see the school counselor. And basically what was said was is that Henry's act of violence, which was hitting a girl with a very hard object shouldn't be tolerated. And Joe felt offended because he doesn't see his son as violent. And basically, his excuse is that if it only happened one time, you can't really categorize a child being violent. So basically, there's this judgment happening. But all in all, Joe feels judged. It's like one of those things where you cannot judge my kid. You don't know my kid because I'm the one who raised him and I'm doing the best that I can. So if they press charges against Henry, he would be expelled. So as you can see, this is a classic way a parent can project their guilt and their shame towards the realities of their child's behavior, as if like, oh, that could never be my child, not mine. They can't make me look bad. No way. They come from me. Instead of receiving the information that dismantles the ego and looks at the reality of the situation so they could indeed help their child. But I digress. But let's segue into how Joe idealizes his female counterparts and how he thinks they're someone to save, while ultimately he's just trying to subconsciously save himself. Let's look at a clip how he falls for a former coworker called Marianne. So as they walk around and build rapport, Joe is trying to establish a connection with Marianne, besides just being physically attracted to her. And towards the end, he's thinking, how can I convince you to be my or our happily ever after? Now, as you can see, he's smitten. He loves the qualities that she has, but if you really listen to it, it's more on how he makes Joe feel, right? And which is classic for people who are in a deep state of limerence or have narcissistic tendencies. And for the ones who don't know, Marianne was the person that Joe was having an affair with while being married to Love Quinn. But Marianne had the idea that they were getting divorced. But anyway, Marianne finds out who Joe really is, which is a massive serial killer and a manipulator. So she flees to London, never wanting to be found by him again. And Joe is leaving felt destitute, lonely, and depressed, which is only recreating the abandonment wound for him. So he follows her to London, traps her, right, and puts her in the classic cage, while ultimately devaluing her because now she sees Joe for who he truly is. Let's look at this clip. So Joe traps Marianne, kidnaps her, ties her to the chair, and they sit at the dinner table. Marianne says to Joe that I really, really need to talk to my daughter. And Joe, basically showing a lack of remorse, ignores her and then mentions something about a writer. Very, very remorseful, right? And then she starts to freak out. Then Joe silences her, puts the thing around her mouth so she can shut up. Talk about love, right? All the women that he dated were fragments of Joe's wounds and reflections, and they all played out in different ways. But let's look at the dark feminine catalyst, Bronte. Bronte was a student of Guinevere Beck, which was Joe's first idealized victim of abuse. Beck was characterized as the good girl, with a carefree lightness to her. Inside, though, she was deeply insecure and still recovering from old wounds that deemed her unworthy. Beck was a writer and a teacher and inspired by many. Bronte found out that Beck was killed. It led her into a spiral of emotional turmoil. She found out that it was indeed Joe who killed her, and with that she felt a strong sense of internal justice to get rid of him for good. So she and others conspired to capture and kill Joe so they can get the justice for Guinevere Beck, which she deserves. In a way, she represents the dark, unhinged feminine in Joe's downfall. I say unhinged because she also feels compelled in the realm of intoxicating and illusionary romance that Joe is spewing. And it also correlates into the stories she writes. She was sneaking into his bookstore that he bought with Kate's money, which was Joe's third wife in the last season. Bronte had a sense of rebellion and mischief, which in fact intrigued Joe. It excited him, which led him to idealize the beautiful, fiery Bronte. When she did fall for him at some point, there was a point where she didn't forget her mission, but she underestimated how manipulative Joe was. She was so encapsulated by how Joe made her feel, and she felt like she was living in the very stories that she has written. Stories of eroticism, novelty, excitement, and rawness. I do think she underestimated Joe's manipulative tactics, even though she was kind of playing along, But for someone like her, she's very mysterious, very deep, very fierce, right? And she loves intensely, which kind of created an internal chaos within her. But at some point, she decides to snap out of the illusion and decides to be the end marker of Joe's destructive cycle. Let's look at the scene. So after a romantic night under the stars in the boat in the river or in the pond, they go upstairs and they start to initiate making love. And then all of a sudden, she pulls out a gun. And Joe is kind of surprised. He did think that it was too hard to believe that she bought the story of how Guinevere Beck died in the first place. So all in all, he knew that this was the ending regardless. Wow. That was intense, right? So as you can see, Joe never loved these women, and nothing to them. It has nothing to do with them, but they were an escape. They were a window so he could feel better about himself and create this illusionary devotion about how much he loves them and shit, right? And in reality, Joe is a serial killer. He's a massive manipulator and an energetic thief and likes to play victim a lot. Now let's look at the scene of how Bronte becomes the dark feminine who decides to rise and becomes the antagonist of Joe's unwavering fantasy. In this scene, Joe is running away from the police that Bronte called a while ago while he was attacking her. Joe thought he killed Bronte, let alone she was playing dead. And she, being the antagonist as she is in his story, tries to end Joe, but not kill him, but to face the mirror that he's been avoiding all along. Therefore, she shoots him and then stops him in his tracks, and then the police get him. And then he gets the punishment that he so well deserves for all the bodies that he's killed. Now we're all happy Joe's in jail. He got what he motherfucking deserved, right? But you know what's crazy? In his cell, he intertwined self-denial with self-righteousness. Check out this scene. This is the scene where Joe faces his demise, being alone, feeling unloved by anyone. And he basically convinces himself that it wasn't his fault. I mean, we're all just a byproduct of our trauma, which is true, but clearly he hasn't taken any real responsibility of what he's done. And basically says that the problem isn't me, but it's you. When I looked at the scene, I was like, damn, this is probably some of the internal dialogue that some of the people that I've dated in the past probably had. And it's kind of scary to think that people can convince themselves that they are in the right when they have caused devastation and such hard betrayal to others. And this also helps you to see what it looks like when someone cannot take responsibility for the life of them, which further enforces me to not be with people that never take responsibility or can look at themselves at all. Because, like, ew. So I got rid of the mics because it stopped working, but I wanted to pose this question and answer the question myself. Am I a Joe Goldberg? And not in the serial killer way, right? I think I am because I have loved people from core wounds. And I think, for one, definitely was somebody who was subconsciously manipulative, or someone who basically tried to find people that would love me because I didn't love myself. Therefore, I would attract people that didn't honor me because I didn't honor myself. So in a way, I'm just as guilty as them, right? I probably, not with intention, but I subconsciously used them in order to make me feel better about myself. I absolutely hated solitude. And I did not like being alone, because when you're someone who feels lonely all the time, or when you're someone who has a lack of self-esteem or self-love, you want to be around people that make you think otherwise. But I was doing it in the most unhealthy way. But I still love that version of myself because she still deserves to be loved, even though I am not that person. And let me ask this question towards you. Are you a Joe Goldberg? And again, not in the serial killer type of way, but do you idealize these people, right, to the point where you lose your center? Do you find loving them in a way that's plausible or that makes sense? Or is it really about how they make you feel? Do you fantasize about what could be without really getting to know the person on an introspective and deep level? You see, love isn't about control. It's about letting that person be who they are. It's about being free and facing hard truths. It's about growth, right? It's also loving that person when you know it's time to let them go. You see, we can only be in acts of performance and conformity until the full mask drops. We have fallen into performative acts of love that help us delve into actions that are other than who we are. So let's drop the antics, let's drop the power plays, and let's be ourselves. So I leave you with this. Do you continue to fall for the fantasy and limerick dynamics that only leave you destitute for control, manipulation, and constant reassurance? I'll let you decide.